If you've recently watched a series called The Watcher on Netflix, you may remember a scene in which a creepy cult member describes the fourth turning. You may have recognized this theory from popular culture before, but what exactly is the fourth turning, and why is it used as an accurate precursor to predict the world's events as they unfold? Well, it comes from the generational theory developed by historians William Strauss and Neil Howe in their book The Fourth Turning, An American Prophecy. It's a cyclical model of history that suggests society moves through four repeating 20 to 25 year turnings, each representing a different social mood, generation type, and historical phase. So the four turnings are the high, the awakening, the unraveling, and then the crisis. Where are we today? Well, we'll get to that. Each full cycle, called a seculum, lasts roughly 80 to 100 years, about the length of a long human life. So here's a breakdown of each of the four turnings. So first you have the high, right? This is post-crisis rebuilding. The mood is optimistic, institution-focused, conformist. Society rebuilds and strengthens after a major crisis. Institutions are trusted again. Collective progress is celebrated. The last example of this was the post-World War II era between 1946 and 1964. Then you have the awakening. This is rebellion against structure. So think spiritual unrest, the rise of individualism. And what happens in society? People start to reject conformity and institutional control. You have youth movements, revolutions in culture, religion, and philosophy. The last example of this was the 1960s to the early 1980s. It was a cultural revolution. Strauss and Howe call it a time when the culture throws off social discipline in favor of personal authenticity. So let's look at how that played out in the last awakening era. So you had social and cultural upheavals, the civil rights movement, mass rejection of institutional racism, led by black voices, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, the Black Panthers. You had radical feminism, women demanding bodily autonomy and equal participation. Then you had the anti-Vietnam War movement. Think about Muhammad Ali and all the moral awakening that rejected blind nationalism. Then there was gay liberation, the Stonewall riots, the rise of queer identity as proud and political. We had the actual revolution, birth control, open relationships, polyamory, gay rights all moved out of the shadows. And this was also a time when environmentalism emerged. The first Earth Day was established in 1970, and this was the start of climate consciousness. Then we had the cinematic awakenings. Film was now being used to explore the personal, the political, and the philosophical. Think about Hitchcock's later works, which transitioned from cold control to psychological dismantling. We had Psycho, with its shock value and cultural influence, its fractured identity, The Birds, nature as an inscrutable threat, control as an illusion. These films begin dismantling the neat moral binaries of post-war cinema. So what did I mean by cold control? Think of the dominant mood of Western society from the late 40s to the late 50s. Strong institutions, government, church, marriage. Suppressed emotional expression, strict gender roles, obedience, normalcy, containment, everything in its place. And films reflected this too. Controlled plots, clear moral arcs, repressed characters. It was a time of surface order, but beneath it, there was brewing tension, right? Trauma, identity crises, the fear of nuclear war, and the beginnings of social revolt. Hitchcock's work, especially Psycho, Vertigo, and Rear Window, represented a crack in that cold control. He explored repressed desire, hidden violence behind domestic life, so think Psycho again, and the fragility of identity and perception. Now, these weren't overt political statements, but they did chip away at the facade of control. His characters were often unraveling internally. Actual urges, guilt, voyeurism, obsession. And that mirrored what was beginning to happen in society at large. Then we had the violent rejection of capitalist hypnosis. And if you haven't seen the film They Live, I urge you to watch it. It doesn't just critique greed, it exposes ideology and how even desire is manufactured. It's a scream against a world where reality is a lie, designed to keep you buying, watching, and obeying. And then we had blaxploitation. This was all about black creatives reclaiming the screen. So we had Shaft, Coffee, Cotton Comes to Harlem. Cotton Comes to Harlem is one of my favorite films ever. Superfly, Dolomite, and Get Christy Love, another great film that stars Teresa Graves, who's often theorized as being Whitney Houston's real mother. Now, these films were raw, violent, stylish, and deeply political. They were often critiqued for their stereotypes, but they put black power and black cool on screen for the first time, reflecting a broader awakening of identity. Next, we had New Hollywood and the breakdown of the American myth. This movement took place from the late 60s to the late 70s. It saw young filmmakers blowing up the old studio system, inspired by French New Wave, European existentialism and black radicalism, and LSD. You had films like Taxi Driver, Alienation, Masculinity in Crisis, Paranoia, A Clockwork Orange, Psychoactual Violence, Morality Without Meaning. Psychoactual violence is when violence and sexuality become entangled in unsettling, often disturbing ways in art and film, not just for shock, but to explore the darker, repressed aspects of human nature, especially under collapsing systems. You had Last Tango in Paris, raw actual trauma, emotional damage, intimacy turned into confrontation. These films don't give you easy moral handrails, they force you to sit with discomfort, which reflected a larger cultural moment. Who are we when the rules fall apart? This was morality without meaning. In earlier eras, film tended to offer a clear moral compass, right? You had good versus bad, justice or resolution at the end, characters whose growth reaffirmed societal values. But during the awakening and into the unraveling, which we'll get into next, cinema started to question, are there any universal morals? What if the people in power are corrupt? What if everything we believe in, law, religion, capitalism, is arbitrary? So we get ambiguous heroes, like Travis Bickle, corrupt systems like in Chinatown, and cosmic indifference like in The Exorcist. The feeling becomes, morality exists, maybe, but the structures that claim to represent it are hollow. So why does this matter? In the second turning, this deep questioning, especially in art, is the awakening. It's not about offering solutions yet. It's about confronting the falseness of what came before. Like if everything we were told was right turns out to be wrong, what now? Let's take Basquiat as a unique example. Basquiat is the pre-unraveling prophet. He was off the end of the awakening, but before the unraveling. His work bled panic, prophecy, and rebuke into a Reaganite world, busy pretending it was fine. He painted crowned black saints, skeletal jazzmen, and decapitated systems. His neo-expressionism was full of disruption of language, critiques of colonialism and medical violence. He explored themes of black erasure, capitalism, and fame. In a way, he was a canary in the mine. He collapsed under the very systems he painted. He died in 88, so before the 90s truly began unraveling, but his fingerprints are all over that decade's art, music, and fashion. Think about Paris is Burning, a beautiful 90s documentary about the underground queer culture scene in New York. So now, let's get into the unraveling. This is institutional decline. Think cynical, fragmented, distrustful. Institutions are weakened, individualism is strong, and society becomes more fragmented and polarized. It was last seen during the Reagan, Bush, and Clinton years, so from the mid-80s to 2005. Then we had technology in this time, the rise of the internet, fragmentation of reality. The web starts as a utopia and rapidly becomes surveillance capitalism, information overload, narrative collapse, early warning of social media's future polarization effect. In the institutions, we had distrust and a hollowing out, the church abuse scandals, undermining religious authority, corporations growing more powerful than governments, and the rise of public-private partnerships that privatize everything from prisons to healthcare. Mainstream media credibility declines, sensationalism, corporate consolidation, fake news accusations even before Trump, and globally, there was disillusionment with liberal democracy. The fall of the USSR in 91 was supposed to end history. Instead, the post-Cold War order created economic instability, proxy wars, and nationalism. There was the genocide in Rwanda, Bosnia. The UN and the West largely did nothing. The global South begins to openly question the morality of Western-led institutions, IMF, World Bank, NATO. Then we have the social fabric, isolation and alienation. Social capital collapses, and you had the rise of depression, anxiety, and loneliness as an epidemic. There was decline of affordable housing, the vanishing middle class. Key cultural signals of the unraveling played out in film as well. Think about Fight Club, masculinity, consumerism, nihilism. You had American Beauty, suburban rot, quiet desperation. You had The Truman Show, performativity, surveillance, manufactured reality. And then we had The Matrix, disconnection from reality, seeing the real. We had Belly in 98. This was a Hype Williams film, a hyper-stylized crime film that explores disillusionment with the American dream for black men trapped in cycles of violence and capitalism. You even had Eve's Bayou, a southern gothic that explores trauma, repression, and generational secrets through a black lens. There was I Am Legend, themes of isolation, scientific overreach, and end-of-the-world survival. Next we have The Crisis, which is the fourth turning. This is system collapse and rebirth, and this is where we are right now. The mood is urgent, survivalist, revolutionary. A major existential crisis hits. Economic collapse, a war, a revolution, climate catastrophe, or some combination. Institutions break down or are remade. It's a crucible period that defines the new order. We've likely been in this current turning since 2008, the financial crash, or 2020 with the pandemic, depending on interpretation. Now, you might be wondering, since 2008, it seems to be happening really slowly. And you're absolutely right. This system collapse has been slow, grinding, and uneven. Unlike previous fourth turnings that were punctuated by a single cataclysmic event like Civil War or World War II, our current one is more like a rolling crisis, unfolding across multiple fronts: economic, ecological, spiritual, technological, and definitely social. It's not one big bang. It's a slow motion detonation. So why is the system collapse taking so long? There's a number of reasons. The complexity and interconnectedness of systems. Today's world is far more interwoven with tech, finance, supply chains, energy, media. When systems are more complex, they're also more resilient in appearance, meaning they can absorb shocks until they don't. We've also had patchwork crisis management. The 2008 crash, bailouts. The pandemic, lockdowns, stimulus, then AI acceleration. Climate breakdown, lip service, and slow energy transition. The system has been propped up again and again by kicking the can down the road, but nothing foundational has been fixed. The core fractures are still there, quietly widening. Then we have generational drag. The boomer generation are still largely in power. They're reluctant to relinquish control, especially over institutions they built or inherited. So this slows down transformation, but builds generational pressure from beneath them. Then we have psychological denial. A lot of the West, especially the US and the UK, is still caught in nostalgia loops, trying to revive or preserve the post-World War II boom era. But of course we can't go back. And the refusal to let go of how things were slows the necessary collapse of outdated norms and institutions. So where are we right now? Most theorists believe we're approaching the end of the fourth turning. I'd say we're pretty much at the end. This period is turbulent and often defined by polarizing politics, tick. Institutional distrust, yep. Economic precarity, definitely. Generational divide, tick. And potential for authoritarianism or revolution. A catalyst event, whether it was the financial crash or the pandemic or AI revolution. Many argue we've had several of them, and if historical patterns hold, the climax of this fourth turning is likely to occur in the late 20s to the early 30s. That's when the crisis either breaks society or transforms it. So what comes next? Well, the first turning again. The high. After the storm comes the calm, right? The crisis leads to new institutions, new norms, and a reinvestment in collective purpose. In the past, this brought the New Deal after the Great Depression, the post-World War II boom, a stronger middle class, widespread public infrastructure investment. So yes, in theory, once the storm breaks and the ashes cool down, we could enter a more cooperative and leftward, peace-seeking phase. But we don't return to the old normal, we enter a new one. So when will things just get back to normal? Well, if we follow the cycle, we've had our crisis era from 2008 to 2030, peaking around 2025 to 2030. The next high begins at around 2032 to 2040. But normal doesn't mean utopia, it means stability, a new consensus. Now, it could be green energy focused, AI integrated, post-capitalist, or something else entirely, but it will be shaped by the generations rising now. So millennials and Gen Z as they rebuild. Now, an important caveat here. The Strauss-Howe model is US-centric. It borrows from cyclical theories in ancient history and theology, think Spengler, Toynbee, etc., but it's not a crystal ball. But it is a very useful and accurate lens for understanding how human societies often rise, reform, collapse, and then rebuild. So if we don't shape it that way, if we don't consciously steer the crisis towards justice, healing, and collective rebuilding, then the fourth turning still completes, but it ends badly. History shows us both kinds of outcomes. If the crisis is mismanaged, then the turning may continue with authoritarian rule, civil conflict or secession, ecological collapse, economic feudalism, i.e. the ultra-wealthy versus everyone else, or permanent surveillance and techno-fascism, mass displacement and global instability. This wouldn't be the first time. The previous fourth turning ended with World War II, and the one before that was the Civil War. Before that was the American Revolution. And in Europe, we had the 30 Years' War. the French Revolution, the fall of empires. In each case, those in power either refused to adapt or were too slow to adapt, and younger generations had to force a reset, sometimes violently. So why does this happen? When societies enter the fourth turning, old systems don't work anymore. Institutions lose legitimacy, inequality skyrockets, trust collapses, and people retreat into ideology or tribalism. So, if leaders double down on preserving their own power, people fall into fear instead of solidarity. Media and tech only accelerate the chaos instead of clarity. Then society fractures further instead of healing. The result can be collapse rather than reconstruction. So how do we shape it in a positive way? Well, it means doing the slow, gritty work of choosing solidarity over scapegoating. Hint, hint. Rebuilding trustworthy institutions. Redistributing power, not hoarding it. And prioritizing planet over profit. Reconnecting generations rather than pitting them against each other. And it means cultivating empathy, literacy, and imagination, especially in the young. It means making room for a new story to emerge, one that doesn't repeat the old cycle of empire, exploitation, and burnout. There's no guarantee we'll get it right, but the fourth turning theory gives us a choice. Do we let this be the collapse of a world, or the birth of a new one? If you're feeling this viscerally, you're not alone. Artists, writers, organizers, educators, and healers, these are all people who are trying to shape what survives. I just hope we get it right.